Eliza Orzeszkowa, The Argonauts. Leave a comment to share your opinion. Chapter 6. This time her eyes were fixed on his face, with a gleam which was almost feverish, and again he stood in silence, filled with astonishment. Why could his mouth not open to tell that girl his profoundest conviction? With all the wrinkles between his brows, he said, without a smile, "I said that to get rid of them. I wish to be rid of those gentlemen as quickly as possible." The soles of Kara's feet struck the floor time after time with delight. "Yes, yes! I was sure of that, my best, dearest father." Stroking her hair, he added, "We must be kind. Be kind always. Keep the life in gray-haired, nice old men. You will never lack money for that." She kissed his hands. Suddenly her glance fell on her father's desk, and she cried, "Puffy, Puffy, where have you climbed to? There you are. You have crawled onto the desk and done so much mischief." The ash-colored little dog was on the great desk of the celebrated financier, on the top of a huge pile of papers. He was sitting with his nose against a window pane, growling at crows that were flying past and cawing. In that study, which was so dignified as to be almost solemn, Kara's laughter was heard in silver tones. "Look, father, how angry he is. He is angry at the crows. Oh, how he sticks his little nose up when one of them flies past. Do you see, father?" I see. Never has such a dignified assistant been in charge of my desk. Oh, you little one." He put his arm around her and pressed her to his bosom, briefly but heartily. Through his head passed at that moment the recollection of something unimportant which he had seen on a time, a golden sun-ray, which flashing from behind clouds had torn them apart and disclosed a strip of clear azure beyond. He saw this through a window of a railroad car, mechanically, as we see things to which we are indifferent. Now he remembered it. "The carriage is ready," called the servant from the anteroom. "You are a little giddy-head," said Darvid, looking at the clock. "I should have left the house a quarter of an hour ago." She ran to bring his hat and gave it with a low bow. Stooping quickly, she raised a glove which he had dropped. "Don't forget to leave Puffy here to keep my papers in order." With this jest on his lips, he went to the antechamber, but while putting on his fur and descending the stairway, he thought of the auction, where he was to buy a house sold for debt, an excellent investment. "Is Pan Marion at home?" asked Darvid of the Swiss at the street door. The Swiss learned from servants that the young master was sleeping yet. What a miserable method of life! I must put a curb on this wild buck immediately. Well, lack of time, a chronic lack of time. "Quickly! As quickly as possible!" called he to the driver while entering the carriage. He had left the house too late. His daughter had broken in on him with her twittering and fondling, but she is a ray of sunlight. Kara removed Puff from her father's papers, and putting him on her breast, almost under her chin as usual, passed through the drawing rooms hurriedly. She was late for her lessons with Miss Mary. In one of the drawing rooms she passed Irene. The slow promenade of the tall and formal young lady, with an open book in her hand, continued yet. Kara, while passing, and without stopping, said, with evident gladsomeness, "But I talked long with father today, long." "You have done that trick," answered Irene indifferently. Kara stopped as if fixed to the floor. In the careless voice of her sister she heard irony. She seemed ready for conflict. Her brows contracted suddenly. Her eyes were full of sparks. But Irene, absorbed in reading, was already a good number of steps away. After a few seconds, Kara vanished behind the door of her own room and Miss Mary's. Irene's features, rather meager and elongated, continued motionless. Her paleness increased their formality. But as time passed, wariness settled the more deeply on her drooping eyelids. Whenever she passed a window of the drawing rooms, the pin in her hair eased quick, sharp gleams in the sunlight. At last the door of Malvina's room opened, and out came Kranitsky, quite different from what he had been at his arrival. His shoulders were bent, his head drooping. On his cheeks were red spots, his forehead was greatly wrinkled. He looked as though he had been weeping a moment before. Even his mustaches were hanging in woefulness over his carefully shaven chin. Irene stopped, and with the book in her two hands which she had dropped, gazed at the man approaching her. He hastened his step, took her hand, and said in a low voice and hurriedly, "I am the most wretched of beings. I was not worthy of such great happiness as your mother's friendship, so I lose it. Je suis fini, complètement et cruellement fini. I take farewell of you, Panna Irene. So many years, so many years. I loved you all so greatly, so heartily. Some people call me a romantic old dreamer. I am. I suffer. Je souffre horriblement. I wish you every happiness. Perhaps we may never meet again. Perhaps I shall go to the country. I take farewell of you. So many years. Oh Dieu. His eyelids were red. He was bent more than ever as he passed out. On Irene's face, great alarm appeared. It is true, then. It is true, whispered she. Springing forward like a bird, she passed through the drawing-room, quickly and silently. Invisible wings bore her toward the closed door of her mother's room. When entering, her manner was calm and distinguished as usual, but her eyes, in which there was anxious concern, beheld the form of a woman lying in a deep armchair, her face covered with her hands. Malvina was weeping in silence. Her sobs gave out no sound. They merely shook her shoulders at regular intervals. These shoulders were drooping forward, and it seemed as though an unseen weight were crushing them to the earth and would crush them down through it. Irene hurried, silently, brought a vial from the adjoining bedchamber, poured some liquid on her palm, and touched her mother's forehead and temples with it, delicately. Malvina raised her face, which was deeply agitated by an expression of dread. At that instant, one might have thought the woman feared her daughter. But Irene, in her usual calm voice, said, "Insomnia always harms you, Mamma. Again you have that horrible neuralgia." "Yes, I feel a little ill," answered Malvina in a weak voice. She rose and tried to smile at Irene, but her pale lips merely quivered, and her eyelids drooped. They were swollen from weeping. With a step which she strove to make firm and steady, she went toward her bedroom. Irene followed some steps behind. "Mamma?" "What, my child?" Irene's lips opened and closed repeatedly. It seemed as though some cry would come from them, but she only said in low tones, "A little wine or bouillon might be brought." Malvina shook her head, advanced some steps, looked around. "Ira!" The daughter stood before her mother, but now Malvina in her turn was speechless. She inclined her forehead, which covered slowly with a blush. At last she inquired in a low voice, "Is your father at home? I heard him drive away some moments ago. On his return, should he wish to see me, say that I am waiting for him." "Very well, Mamma." In the door she turned again. "Should someone else come, I cannot." Irene halted a number of steps from her mother in the formal posture of a society young lady, and said, "Be at rest, Mamma. I shall not go a step away, and I shall not let anyone interrupt you. Not even father, if you wish. Perhaps tomorrow would be better." "Oh, no, no," cried Malvina with sudden animation. "On the contrary, as soon as possible. Beg your father to come, and let me know at the earliest." "Very well, Mamma." Malvina closed the bedroom door, advanced a few steps, and fell on her knees at her richly covered bed. Amid furniture, finished in yellow damask, on a downy bed, covered with cambric and lace, she raised her clasped hands and said, in whispers broken with sobs, "O God! O God! O God!" She was of those weak beings who to live need heartfelt love as much as air, and who are infected by this love without power of resisting it. To such a love had she yielded once in the chill and emptiness of rich drawing-rooms. That was a happening of long ago. She was the weaker at that time because she was caught by a breeze from the spring of her life, passed in the company of that man who was casting himself at her feet then. In that moment of yielding, a pebble had dropped on her, the weight of which increased with the course of years and the growth of her children. She had not thought for an instant that she was the heroine of a drama. On the contrary, she repeated, with a face always blushing from shame, "Weak, weak, weak." And, from a time rather remote, it was joined with another word, guilty. She was weak. Still today she had found strength at last to cut one of those knots in which her life had been involved so repulsively. Oh, that the other might be torn apart quickly. Then she could go far from the world into lone obscurity, an abyss occupied only by her endless penitence. In her head a plan had matured. She wished to speak with Darvid as soon as possible, and she doubted not that in the near future he would agree with her. Her daughters? Well, was it not better that such a mother should leave them, vanish from their eyes? Irene pushed to the window a small table on which were painting materials. She took her place at the table, and with fixed attention in her eyes began to outline a cluster of beautiful flowers. They were chrysanthemums, and seemed to be opening their snowy and fiery petals to mystic kisses. Deep silence reigned in the mansion, and only after a certain time had passed did the sound of glasses and porcelain come from a remote apartment, and at the door of the study a servant appeared, announcing that lunch was served. Irene raised her head from her work. "Tell Panna Caroline and Miss Mary that Mama and I will not come to the table." She added a command to bring 2 cups of bouillon and some rusks. A while later she stood with a cup in her hand at her mother's door. "May I come in?" She held her ear to the door. There was no answer. Her lids blinked anxiously. She repeated the question, adding, "Mamma, I beg." "Come in, Ira!" Covered with silken materials, Malvina was like a glittering wave on the bed. Irene entered with the bouillon and the rusks, then slipped through the room quietly and let down the shades. A mild half-gloom filled the chamber. "This is better. Light when one has the headache is hurtful." She went to the bed. "You cannot sleep in these tight boots. Try as you like, and without some hours of sleep, the neuralgia will not leave you." Before these words were finished, her slender hands had changed the tight boots for roomy and soft ones. She bent down and with a touch of her fingers unfastened a number of hooks at her mother's breast. "Now it will be well." Irene dropped her arms on her dress and smiled a little. Despite her fashionable robe and fantastic hairdressing, there was in her at that moment something of the Sister of Charity. She seemed painstaking and cautious. "And now, Mamma, be a little glutton," added she with a smile. "You will drink the bouillon and eat the rusk. I will go to paint my chrysanthemums." She was at the door when she heard the call. "Iara!" "What, Mamma?" 2 arms stretched toward her and surrounded her neck, and lips, so feverish that they burnt, covered her forehead and face with kisses. Irene in return pressed her lips to her mother's forehead and hand, but for a few seconds only. Then she withdrew from the embrace with a gentle movement, moved away somewhat, and said, "Be not excited, for that may increase the neuralgia." At the door she turned again. "Should anything be needed, just whisper. You know what delicate hearing I have. I shall hear. I shall be painting in your study. Those chrysanthemums are beautiful, and I have a new idea about them which interests me greatly." In the tempered winter light from the window, in that study full of gilding, artistic trifles, syringas, and hyacinths, Irene sat at the table with painting utensils, sunk in thought and idle. From beneath her brows, which had each the outline of a delicate little flame, her fixed eyes turned toward the past. She had in mind a time when she was 10 years old and was fitting a new dress on her doll with immense interest. At first she did not turn attention to her parents' conversation in the next chamber, but afterward, when the dress was fitted to the doll as if melted around it, she raised her head and through the open door began to look and listen. Her father, with a jesting smile, was sitting in an armchair. Her mother, in a white gown, was standing before him, with such an expression in her eyes as if she were praying for salvation. "Aloysius," said she, "have we not enough? Is there nothing in the world except property and profits, this golden idol?" "I beg you to consider that there is something else," interrupted he, with a slight hiss of irony, "this luxury which surrounds you and becomes you so well." Then she seated herself opposite him, and bending forward spoke somewhat quickly, disconnectedly. "Do we live with each other? We do not by any means. We only see each other. There is nothing in common between us. You are swallowed up by business, I by society. I have taken a fancy, it is true, for amusement, but in the depth of my heart I am often very gloomy. I feel lonely. My early life, as you know, was modest, poor, toilsome, and often it calls to me reproachfully. You do not know of this, for we have no time to exchange ideas. I am of those women who need to feel guardianship, to have near them an ear which might listen to their hearts, and a mind which would direct their conscience. I am weak, I am full of dread. I fear that in view of your frequent, almost continual absence, I shall not be able to rear the children properly. I only know how to love them, I would give my life for them, but I am weak. I beg you not to leave me and them so frequently, that is, almost continuously. Rather let this luxury decrease. I shall be glad, even, for the decrease will bring us nearer together. I beg you." She seized his hands, and it seemed as though she kissed them, but it was certain that the pale golden wave of her disheveled hair fell on them. Irene, though she was only 10 years old then, felt pity for her mother and waited with intense curiosity for her father's answer. "What do you wish in particular?" asked he. I listen. Still I do not know exactly what the question is. Is it this, that I should stop work, which I love and which succeeds with me? You must be in a waking dream. Those are ideas from another society, mere childish fancies." Here Irene's thoughts were interrupted by the entrance of Kara. "Ira, is Mamma sick, since she did not come to luncheon?" "Mamma has neuralgia often, you know that well." Kara turned to the door of her mother's bedroom, but Irene stopped her. "Do not go, she may be sleeping." The girl approached her sister. "It seems to me," she whispered and stopped. "What seems to you a second time?" "That there is something going on in this house." Irene frowned. "What an imagination you have! You are ever imagining something uncommon. Now all these uncommon things are painted pots or illusions. Life rolls on always in a common prosaic movement. Stop making painted pots, and go out to walk with Puff and Miss Mary." Kara listened attentively, but with an incredulous expression of eyes, which were fixed on her sister's face. "Very well, I will go to walk, but what you have said is not true, Ira. It is not painted pots that Mamma is suffering and sick, that Father goes out to dine for a whole week and does not come to her at all. Even that man, going out today, began to cry in the antechamber. I saw him by chance. He wanted to say something to me, but I ran away." Irene shrugged her shoulders. "You will be a poetess, perhaps. You exaggerate everything so terribly. Mamma is not troubled. She only has neuralgia. Father does not dine with us because he has so many invitations, and Pan Kranitsky struck his nose against something which you, in poetic imagination, took for crying. Men never cry, and sensible girls, instead of filling their heads with painted pots, go to walk while good weather lasts and the sun shines. The doctor tells you to walk every day, not in the evening, but about this hour." I am going. You drive me away." She went on a number of steps and turned again toward her Astor. "Father is angry at Marion. I see that very clearly. Everything in this house is somehow so strange." She went out, but Irene clasped her hands, and for some seconds squeezed them with all her might, and thought, "That child will soon look at life just as I have been looking at it for some time past. It is necessary to foresee, absolutely necessary." She returned to her reminiscences. Her mother said to her father, "Our fortune is now considerable." "In that direction," answered her father, "it never can be too great, nor even sufficient." Then, playing with her beautiful hair, he asked, "But do you believe that I love you?" After some hesitation she answered, "No. I have lost that faith. I lost it some time ago." Later there were many other words, some of which Irene remembered. "The very best guardianship in this world," said her father, "is wealth. Whoso has that will never lack mind even, since, in ease of need, he can buy mind from other men. In the training of our children you will expend all that is requisite. You will rear for me our daughters to be grand ladies, will you not? Educate them so that when mature they may feel as much at home in the highest social circles as in their own father's household. As to you, amuse yourself. Make connections, dress, be brilliant. The more you elevate the name which you bear by beauty, wit, knowledge of life, the more service will you render me in return for the services which I render you. Besides, if you have any difficulty with the house, with teachers, with social relations, you have that honest Kranitsky, who will serve you with great good will. I am very much pleased with that acquaintance. Just such a man did I need. He has extensive and very good connections. He is perfectly well bred, obliging, polite. Foreseeing that he might be very useful to us, I became familiar with him. It is true that he has borrowed money a number of times of me, but he has rendered a number of services. Pay in return for value, that is the best method." He walked up and down through the room repeatedly. On his forehead, in his look, in his movements, he had an expression of perfect confidence in himself, his rights, and his reason. Suddenly, turning toward the door of remoter rooms, he cried with delight, "Speak of the wolf, and he is before you. I greet you, dear sir." With these words he extended his hand to the guest who was entering. This was Kranitsky, at that time in his highest manly beauty, petted, and a favorite in the best social circles because of it, and for other reasons also. He gave a hearty greeting of Darvid, who met him with delight, and then he stood before Malvina in such a posture, and with such an expression on his face, as if he desired only one thing on earth, to be able to drop on his knees before her. That conversation and scene remained fixed in Irene's memory. She drew from it formerly extensive conclusions, then she ceased altogether to recall it. Now she thought again of it, forgetting her painted chrysanthemums, which, on the blue satin, seemed to gaze at her, having as subtle and enigmatical a look as she herself had. A servant at the door announced, "Baron Emil Blauendorf." "Not at Ho," began she at once, but, halting, instructed the servant to ask him to wait. At her mother's desk she wrote on a narrow card of Bristol board, in English, "Mamma is ill with neuralgia. I am nursing her, and cannot see you today. I regret this, for the talk about dissonances began to be interesting. Bring me the continuation of it tomorrow." She gave this card, in an envelope addressed to the Baron, to a servant, and sat down again to her chrysanthemums, this time with a smile both malicious and gladsome. With his appearance in that house, though unseen by her, Baron Emil had lent form in her head to a certain whimsical idea. She knew that it was whimsical, but just for that reason it pleased her, and must also please the Baron. She began quickly, almost with enthusiasm, to paint dark outlines of imps among the flowers. She disposed them so that they seemed to separate the flowers and keep them apart from one another. Some imps were climbing up, others were slipping down. They peeped out from behind petals, climbed along stems, but all were malicious, distorted, capricious, and pushed the tops of the flowers apart in such fashion that they did not let the half-bending petals meet in kisses. Painting quickly, Irene laughed. She imagined Baron Emil saying at sight of this work, "C'est du nouveau. It is not a painted pot. It is an individual thought. There is a new quiver there. It bites." The expressions painted pots, Arcadians, it bites, new quivers, rheumatism of thought, and many more she had from him, and she was not the only one who borrowed. These expressions had spread in a rather largo circle of people who despised everything existing and were seeking everything which was new and astonishing. Baron Emil was cultured, had read much. He read frequently Nietzsche's Zarathustra, and spoke of the coming race, the superhumans. He spoke somewhat through his nose and through his teeth. The superhuman is he who is able to will absolutely and unconditionally. When Irene thought that perhaps she would soon become the Baron's wife and leave that house, her brows contracted and her jeering smile vanished. Oh, she would not let him escape her. She had an absolute condition to put before the Baron. He would accept it most assuredly, through deference to the amount of her dower. Energy glittered in her blue eyes. She turned her face toward the door of her mother's room with so quick a movement that the metallic pin in her hair cast a gleam of sharp steel above her head. "One must know how to will," whispered she. "Remember to subscribe.